You know this region terribly well, having served, among other things, as a spokesperson for the coalition in Iraq. We had the horrific explosion of the hospital in Gaza this week. It's a fog of war. Do we know what happened? Will we ever know what happened in that hospital?
Well, Hamas historically, and in this case, in this war, the same will be true. Hamas historically co-locates its offensive weapons capabilities and the offices, the personnel offices of its senior military commanders, its war rooms where decision-making is being made, in hospitals, in UN-run schools, in various child care facilities. Basically, they try to co-locate these, with high areas that have high concentrations of civilians, with the hope that if they fire from there, these people, these innocent civilians around them in hospitals and schools and elsewhere, will effectively be human shields. That is to say that, one, either Israel responds to take out the offensive military capability or the Hamas commanders, and in the process kills a bunch of civilians, innocent, quote unquote, innocent civilians, that then can become a PR win, or B, that Israel then becomes reticent to do it because they don't want to do it. And I think, and I dealt with versions of this in Iraq, not this exact situation, but versions of this. I just had to spend a lot of time, like, just trying to educate the press and the public about how these terror organizations work.
But Dan, let me pick up on something you talked about, the PR effect of these things. And again, you've been in these conflict zones. One of the priorities, certainly for the United States government, is to try to limit this conflict so that it doesn't spread to places like Hezbollah up in the north, and goodness knows, not into Iran. What is the danger now, given what we saw happen this week, where the Arab countries apparently pulled back during President Biden's visit? What is the danger that it almost doesn't matter what really happened, the damage has been done?
Look, I think most of these countries, so there's two issues here. One is, I think the U.S.-Saudi normalization track was moving quickly. And I think it was moving even more quickly than press reports were reflecting. And I think that was possibly, I think there were three motivations for October 7th that we know of. One was Israel's enemies wanted to do something big and dramatic on the 50-year anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. Two, I think that Israel's enemies believed that Israel was particularly vulnerable at this time because of the protest movement in Israel over the last 9 months, and they thought they had seen in Israel unprecedented division and that this was a good time to strike. And then three, that the Saudi normalization process was moving and had a lot of momentum, and they wanted to disrupt it. And one way to disrupt it is to light up the Arab street. How do you light up the Arab street? Create a situation where Israel is in some very messy war with the Palestinians, and that concern for Palestinian life becomes a very highly charged political issue on the Arab street. So I think that is a risk right now in many of the Arab countries. And I think that is what many of them are responding to. And I think that's why the summit earlier this week was canceled when President Biden was in Israel. And I think that the risk that all these countries, you see the number of these Arab countries, which have been speaking out, I think, in a pretty irresponsible way in terms of the statements they've been making about the current crisis, with some notable exceptions like the UAE. But I think but some countries, including Saudi Arabia, have not made constructive statements, even though they despise Hamas and they want Hamas destroyed. But their public statements reflect concern about the risk that this could light up their own street and threaten monarchies throughout the Gulf.
So, Dan, in addition to the Genius of Israel coming out next month, you wrote earlier Startup Nation. Talk to us about what likely effects the conflict we're seeing right now will have on the startup nation, if I can call it that, in Israel. That is, the tech startups over there that have been such an engine for growth in the Israeli economy. So,
first of all, if you just the macroeconomics, the Bank of Israel has announced that they think about a 1% of GDP is going to get shaved off so far from this war, and that's less to do about the tech economy, but just tourism shut down. There's no real, the private economy, the non-tech economy in Israel is just not doing much. It's pretty much shut down. When you have 300 to 350,000 reservists being called up, that's an unbelievably high percentage of the overall labor force. So it's just work is just ground to a halt in most parts of the economy. Export a tiny country, as you know, about 9.3 million people, has no real domestic market. So most of the economy is an export focused, and tech is the biggest part of that. My sense so far is most of the tech companies are going to continue to operate. Obviously, they'll have to adjust. It's gonna feel a little bit like COVID. Those I speak to in the tech scene in Israel says it's back to remote work. A, because it's not safe to be going into the office, and B, because schools are shut down, so they're back to remote learning, so they have to be home. But the tech companies are still basically working. I've looked at a couple of investments where they're still fundraising. Fundraising hasn't stopped. The big multinational companies, there's between 400 and 450 multinationals that have major innovation centers in Israel. Microsoft, Google, Meta. I mean, you go the major auto companies, even non-tech companies like Walmart, Procter and Gamble, Coca-Cola. All these companies have major R&D operations in Israel, and talking to them, nothing shut down. They're still functioning. Their people are still there. They're going to keep doing what they're doing. I will say, David, but that said, this is an adversarial situation. So things will slow down a little bit, but they're not. My point is, they're not going to grind to a halt. I would say there's one encouraging piece here. In 1991, during the first Gulf War, as you recall, Scud missiles were landing on Israel, and Israel shut down. Everyone was in gas masks, in sealed rooms. No businesses were functioning. Intel, at the time, the Intel Corporation, had a major operation in Israel, and that's where most of their most important R&D for chips was being worked on. And Intel Israel stayed open despite the Scud missiles. And they worked 24 hours a day. They set up volunteer kindergartens so people could bring their kids in, and they had other workers volunteering to take care of kids while others were working in fabs and whatnot. And they never missed a deadline. Everything stayed on schedule. And they sent a message to Silicon Valley, in that particular case to Santa Clara, to Intel headquarters. Don't worry. No matter what they throw at us, we will keep getting it done. And so it's that lesson that we wrote about in our last book, and we write about a little bit in our next book, that was like a reminder that Israelis can be through a lot, or at least their tech community, and still keep chugging along. One encouraging note, and again, it's hard to use the word encouraging in this environment we're in right now, is the tech community, the startup nation community, has come together in a way that you would be hard pressed to find in any other country, and they're a big part of the civilian mobilization and volunteering, and even if they're not called up for reserves, they're helping out in every way possible. And I do think that gives them a kind of a grit and a determination and a whole series of skills in dealing with crisis that I think can only help them, whatever they do after this war, God willing, is over, whether it's their startups or working for big multinationals. So I think near term bumpy for obvious reasons, but manageable. Medium term and long term, I'm actually even more bullish on Israel's startup economy than I was before October 7th.